Awayithandi awayifuni
Numsale, yo Numsale,
ayiwafuna amaphutho
Numsale,
asiwafuna amakhapeta
Numsale,
lesohlale
Numsale, yo Numsale.
Good day and welcome to another episode of Workers' Power. My name is Pax and I'm going to be your host today. I'm so excited. And in fact, today's show is going to be a little different because we have some guests who are actually going to join us today. They are going to be part of today's show, which is going to be focusing on climate change and also on just energy transition and what that term actually means. So for some of you who probably, I'm sure you've heard the term just transition. It's this phrase that really is referring to this process that countries all over the world are embarking on, which is to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and to begin to rely more on renewable energy. Having said that, I now would like to introduce my guests. To my left, I have Kandis Sebro. She is the Education Officer for the Oilfields Workers Trade Union in Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, Kandis.
Thank you so much for having me here. And it really is a pleasure for me to be with such a great union with Numsa here today. So I'm very, very pleased to represent the Oilfields Workers Trade Union in this institution right now.
And we also have Comrade Enos Mbodi. Comrade Mbodi is the National Secretary of the National Shop Steward Council for Numsa. He also sits on the Presidential Climate Change Commission in South Africa, which is dealing with this big question of the just energy transition. Welcome, Comrade. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. It is a pleasure to be part of the show. Hopefully, we will be able to highlight a few things around the impact of climate change and what is to be done and whether it is done right or if it is done at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a great space to be at. Thank you for having me.
Great. And having said that, I think let's just start with Kandis. Mm-hmm. Some of our viewers are probably, don't know that much about Trinidad and Tobago. Perhaps you can just position us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the organization that you represent, the OWTU. What does it do? Where are you guys organized?
Well, the Oilfields Workers Trade Union is, as we always say, a great and noble institution. It has been, it was registered since 1937, and the country actually was given independence in 1962. So this institution is older than the country. And we would have come out of that mass movement with Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler. That would have led to the introduction of not only nationalization of the petroleum sector, but also in terms of the whole framework for our entire economy, which is a petroleum-dependent economy. And most of the oil comes from the southern belt where we're based. And if you have an idea as to where Trinidad and Tobago is, we're right next to Venezuela. So that access to all of the oil on and offshore is easily accessible there in Venezuela with their importance in terms of the amount of reserves, etc. So that basically is a broad idea of our national economy. So obviously, it's being the Oilfields Workers Trade Union, we too had a great importance in terms of not only the shaping of the economy, but the shaping of the society as a whole.
Okay. And as you tell us about what the role of the trade union is, so you are exclusively organizing workers just in the oil and gas sector, or is there on the value chain, and how many members do you represent?
Well, we originally began in oil, right? Because we would have been that colony of the UK that would have been used. You would have had all the multinationals coming in to extract oil, etc. But through that process of independence, etc., we would have actively mobilized to try and organize the entire working sector. So we are in oil and gas, energy, obviously, and also the manufacturing sector. And that would have happened because, if you're familiar a little bit with how the two power brokers interface, there was a little challenge in our 1.5 million population where we were having too many numbers. So they limited us to only 2 utilities. So we stopped mobilizing outside of oil and gas at that point, and we were just oil and gas, energy, and manufacturing at that point.
Oh, okay.
Which, I mean, in today's world, that would have shifted a bit with the COVID reality.
Mm-hmm.
But we are still limited to only 2 utilities because of the impact that has on the national economy.
I see. Okay. Comrade Mbodi, you are representing workers in the energy sector. So you obviously are dealing with workers who are employed at Eskom in South Africa. We've got only one power utility which provides energy. What can you say about Numsa's representation in the energy sector in terms of, some of the work that we do for our members in that space?
The work that we do in the energy sector as Numsa, it is very important to note that energy becomes the core of the economy. It's like the bloodline of the economy. So if you have got problems in the energy sector, whether it is deficiency in the generation sector, or you don't have good representation of workers there, you're beginning to affect the economy. So what we try to do is to see ourselves as a centerpiece of what other sectors Numsa has, which are in the manufacturing sector. Mm. We know we have got to get things right and represent right, and also see the policy direction in the energy sector that can affect all other sectors and make the representations for the union in such a way that we cover the ground for other sectors. So other sectors may not even know exactly the whole ball game, but we have kept our eyes peeled on policy formulation, policy direction, and making sure that we mainstream them, bring them to the fold of the union. And that is basically what we are doing.
And actually on that point, because it actually brings us nicely to the topic that we're going to discuss, which is about the just energy transition and the policies around that. And Numsa's done a lot of work around that. If you perhaps can actually just define for our viewers, what is Numsa's position on what a just transition is?
Okay. Firstly, many people misrepresent our position. Our position has never been against dealing with climate change and devastations. We believe that we need to mitigate and adapt. We need to do that because we've got only one Earth that we need to take care of. Mm-hmm. And but when it comes to just transition, what we have watched, without even defining just transition, what we have watched was transitions that happened without any justice aspect. And so just transition was a term that was largely from the ILO. And it was talking about the justice or the fairness as we transition from fossil fuel to renewable. And the justice aspect, and I think, let me touch on the justice aspect so that people may understand what the just stands for. The just stands for 3 pillars of justice. One is procedural justice, which deals with inclusivity, making sure that no one is left outside the transition and get told what the transition is about without them being involved. The other one is distributive justice. This looks at the opportunities and the risks of the transition and make sure that they are equitably shared. There is no need for business to get all the profit at the back of the suffering of our people. So what we do as a trade union, is to make sure that we look at how equitable is the share of opportunities and risks, whether the risks are given to the poor and the working class. That we need to be clear about and fight alongside our classmates, so to say, the poor and the working class that are in your NGOs and civil societies. The third one is restorative justice, which is about making sure that you take care of things that needs to be taken care of. For instance, if you go to Mpumalanga, restorative justice might also mean that there should be a hospital that deals with breathing ailments, because people are breathing a lot of CO2 emission, yes. And if there is poisoned water streams, for instance, there should be a way of rehabilitating those streams. So you cannot deal with just transition without the three working together. So all of them need to work together. You include the people so that you may also check their risks and opportunities, and also make sure that when you are doing that, they do not die waiting for you to deal with everything. You need to restore what needs to be restored.
Yeah.
So those are the three aspects that are very, very important to note. So when we go out there, when we say just transition may not be just, it's because we are looking at the three pillars and say, are people included, not only included in a tick box exercise, included in making sure that they get to discuss to put the agenda, to put on the agenda what it is that they want to see.
Yeah.
And also to be included in the economic benefits.
Yeah. So on that note, because I do think that we're definitely going to unpack more of that, and this is why I actually want to bring Kandis in, because what Mbodi was talking about is the equality. He was talking about fairness in the process. He's talking about, and he broke it down in three ways. He's talking about procedural justice, distributive justice, and restorative justice. From your experience as OWTU, is that how you would say the process, the just transition process, has been rolled out in your country?
Well, he knows. So I'm basically going to repeat a lot of what he said, but in terms of the practice as to how they would have introduced the policy, they began speaking about the just transition policy, which is, as per the OWTU, my chief education and research officer always talks about how they would have co-opted the term from the labor union, because there's no concept of justice which is included in the transition process that they're proposing. And when you look at how the policy was introduced into the country, and they would have come forward, say, come to this stakeholder session, and of the entire federation, I think we only would have had maybe 2 labor representatives in that initial meeting.
Sure.
And obviously, in a room full of environmentalists and you're talking about a national policy, you have to have labor involved. And as we know, in practice, when you look at how a policy is being developed, the stakeholder process, there is this assumption that we are basically ready to adopt what is being put forward by the technocrats. So within the Oilfields Workers Trade Union, and together with Cipriani Labour College, we would have actively launched a campaign to push back on that introduction of the policy, because, as he would have stated, there's a large labour fallout. And they're coming from a very academic perspective in terms of how that is going to be addressed. We need to, of course, they have the 3 R's: reskilling, retooling, and repurposing, is it? So, yes, we have to educate people and all of that. You have someone who's been working in the industry for a number of years, they're close to retirement, and you're going to educate them to take on a new position in a new field. And what are you going to actually give for the fallout in terms of how these things are going to advance? These things were not properly thought out at all. So our chief, Ozzy Warwick, would have actively worked with the trade unions for energy democracy in terms of creating an alternative, which is something that OWTU is known for, an alternative plan in terms of how they're going to actually deal with a transition that is actually just, one that can actually affect the working class, and one that doesn't trickle down, as they say, in theory, but one that actually contributes to the quality of life of the entire working class of Trinidad and Tobago.
On that note, because I actually want to pick up on what you just said, where you said that your organization actually worked on an alternative. What did that alternative look like? So what were the pitfalls or the challenges that you experienced that made you come up with an alternative, and how does it address that?
Well, I think that as unionists, we know that every time they talk about restructuring, or they're doing a transition from one sector to the next, and for Trinidad and Tobago, as I said, we are oil dependent, so there would have been mass fallout. We know that once this is shut down, the result is just a lot of displaced workers.
Yeah.
So the country in itself, with our limited numbers, the quality of life has just decreased. Everybody is basically now working, well, we say paycheck to paycheck. Some people say hand to mouth, So the reality in itself looks nothing like what it would look on the beautiful academic paper that's presented by the technocrats. So as he would have said, when you listen to a labor unionist speak to it, and I can't tell you the full policy off the top of my head, but feel free to access the Oilfields Workers Trade Union page, and you can hear Aussie Ward deal with it in depth. Those are the pillars that we have to look at in terms of what is it going to mean in practice for the quality of life of the workers that are going to come out of this sector, which for Trinidad and Tobago is very, very important because of our limited numbers and, of course, the dependency that we experience.
Sure. And I think, Kandis is raising a very important point, because in South Africa, we were told that this is a good thing for us. And I think we can all agree that climate change is a problem. I think there's no one at this table who's a climate change denialist. We definitely do think that strong, speedy, urgent action needs to be taken when it comes to dealing with climate change. But I think the question here becomes about who must take that action, and at what cost. That's actually what this conversation is boiling down to. What is the cost, and who will pay the cost? And if you consider the fact that, for example, Africa as a continent contributes less than 4% of carbon emissions, and yet in South Africa's racing to implement this. Comrade Mbodi spoke about this earlier, and the impact is so devastating. Perhaps you can tell our viewers about a real-life example. What happened at Kamati? Because our minister, just last week, Pravin Gordhan, was telling the world that Kamati is a success story of just transition. What is your view, Comrade Mbodi? Is Kamati a success story?
In the head of the minister, that is a success story. But he is not qualified to be the one being the judge of that process. That process is people-centered. And if the people say it's not just, it is not just. And we have had several meetings with the organized labor comrades and your NGO civil societies. All of them are saying the same thing. What on earth were you doing? If they can't even understand what was being done, it is not supposed to be the minister telling us if that is a flagship project or not. It is the people who should be saying, we know the transition gives us these economic benefits, and we know we have been included from the beginning of the process right to the end. And we know the process and the steps that were taken. We were part of the journey map. We were part of everything that was done there. We understand. It is one thing that people may not agree with everything that has been done, but it is another when nothing was shared with them. But they're just being told at the end that this is a just transition flagship project. And it is not correct. The workers, to start with, were shipped from that power station to other power stations. And they were told in no uncertain terms that if you don't take up the jobs there, you will be stranded for jobs going forward. As Numsa, we see workers as workers. If you are a contracted worker, you are a worker. So there are contracted workers who ESCOM didn't even cover for. ESCOM seems to think just transition is about them addressing their shop floor issues. It is more than that, because the people that are contracted to service the power stations are part of the workforce, and a whole lot of them are unemployed as we speak right now. And we have seen some of them saying, look, there is nothing that we got out of this. There is no just transition because we don't even know what was taking place. And what makes things worse is when you look around and you see that the issue of just transition can't be reduced to just energy transition merely. It should be a just transition, which is not only looking at the energy aspect. Because after all, I will just make an example of the transition in Kamati. The transition in Kamati led the people of Kamati having no water in two informal settlements. The water was reticulated coming from ESCOM power station, which when it decommissioned the water to those.
So there's no water to the community now that the power station has shut down?
There are two informal settlements that do not have water, that are using trucks. The trucks were actually on our visit. Trucks were delivering water.
Wow.
But there is not even your pre-primary school education. So you cannot go and say there is a preschool there or something of that sort. They don't even have a clinic.
Sure.
It is a mobile clinic that comes once in a while. Now the question is, of all the ailments that people acquired during the life of Kamati, what is the restorative justice? Now I'm just touching on the distributive side, for instance. I mean, when Kamati was decommissioned, ESCOM had also sold some of the amenities for your soccer ground is now in the hands of private hands. Now people wanting to play soccer must pay in order to go to play in that ground. I mean, one believes that, the buildings that were sold by ESCOM could have been used to house a clinic at least, or some sort of a police station, something like that.
So basically, they should have used those buildings or repurposed them for the benefit of the community. They didn't. And so, the community...
They should even have been that discussion with the society. What can we are disinvesting.
Yeah.
How can we make this easier? The people obviously were going to mention the things that they think would make their lives easier. But when you are doing it on their behalf without them, you can't have a just transition. And that is what is happening in Kamati, where the World Bank and probably other people like ESCOM think it is just transition.
Yeah.
When the rest do not believe it is.
So what I think the commonalities between South Africa and Trinidad and Tobago is that so far this just transition has been about benefiting the private sector. And so then the question then becomes, and I think this is something that Ozzy dealt very well in. In fact, to our viewers, we are going to drop a link to Ozzy's video where he explains this very nicely in terms of, what was happening in Trinidad and Tobago. But he raises this question a lot in terms of justice, right? The question of justice, the question of compensation. You mentioned earlier, for example, the ridiculousness of expecting an elderly worker who only knows one way of doing something because of their training and their expertise. Suddenly there's this new technology and, they must now adjust. So in your view, what are some of the things that could have been done better to improve the lives of workers so that the process would have been fairer?
I keep feeling like he's already addressed these questions. But the reality is when you have governments deciding on a policy or international bodies deciding on a policy, they enter into countries such as ours with an agenda. And as I said before, there's this expectation that we are going to be okay with this policy that they've put forward. And they in terms of the process, the stakeholder engagement process, one of the things that is generally, the general attitude that you receive is that they don't want real engagement. The real players, the real stakeholders, the people who are actually affected are not actively involved in the process. There may even be people who will actively speak out and say, no, if you shift this, you're going to have all of this fallout. And then when you see the policy develop, that is nowhere to be seen. Those concerns are not taken on board. So to use the words of, there's a sense of condescension in terms of these concerns that are raised are not important. As he said, it has to be people-centered. And the reality is that the unfairness is that it is not. It is this adoption of what is important that comes from outside and an expectation that it must be adopted when the reality on the ground, as we would have mentioned before, the real industrial countries that are making the bigger contributions to climate change,
Yes.
they are not the ones who have this agenda being pushed at them so aggressively. And our reality is, I think our figures are less than 1%. When you look at the size of our islands, the contributions that we make, is that solution the appropriate solution for our country? It has to do with relevance. It has to do with what we consider to be false solutions to the climate change issue. Because it's not just about one size fits all. You have to look at what is relevant to the people and those who will actively be implementing it within their own spaces. And that is something that, unfortunately, regulators have not been actively doing in terms of adapting it to the reality that exists within the country.
I mean, when you look at the impact of climate change, Trinidad and Tobago are islands. And so how have your islands been affected by the massive shifts in weather? And are you seeing, for example, this transition, are you seeing a change? Maybe it's too soon to ask that question, but I think given that we are being told that we're trying to do this to lessen the effects of climate change, how has climate change affected the lives of the people in your country?
Right now, Trinidad and Tobago is undergoing a heat wave. Right now. The reality is my family is right now very uncomfortable for the levels of heat that they're experiencing. And personally, we didn't have that issue before because we kind of live high up in mountains, so it was generally a much cooler environment. Right now, everybody across the country is extremely hot. And that was not our reality before. And when I would have visited them recently, everybody was too cold. So we shift from one extreme to the next, and that is a reality. And when you look at where Trinidad and Tobago, but you have Barbados right next door, and you can hear Mia Motley when she goes to the UN and she speaks so strongly about it, the entire reality. Because the Caribbean, we are on that we are prone to natural disasters, right? They call us small and vulnerable economies. And every time you have natural disasters that come through within that region, the entire economy, the livelihood shifts. So this is not just a theory for us, it's a reality.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could even speak to the reality in Puerto Rico, which is actually terrible after the hurricanes that would have passed through over the past 3 years. In terms of the displacement of people, a lot of Puerto Ricans can't live in Puerto Rico right now. A lot of the houses were empty, etc., because of that reality. When you look at even in Cuba, when they had less of their natural resources, meaning that they would have less bananas, all of that would have been washed down. So these are realities that are very relevant to the entire Caribbean on a daily basis.
And I think, so what we're seeing is that the crisis of climate change is a result of capitalist accumulation, you know, a capitalist greed. That's what brought us here. And then the very same capitalists are the ones who are going to give us solutions.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to before I touch on what is affecting us here in South Africa. I think the geopolitical posture of your global north versus global south is coming to life. We can see it because they are setting the agenda, they are setting the pace. It is as if we should cut, copy, and paste from them. And we've got our socio-economic challenges that we're looking at. And inclusivity for us is not about including them and making them happy. It's to include the people of the country and making sure that we do not over-indebt ourselves, get into serious debt, trying to undo what they cost to the climate. Climate justice will tell you that the impact of climate change stemmed from over-industrialization to a certain extent by these same countries that we're speaking of, the rich countries that set the agenda. And sometimes they set the agenda and 10 do an about 10, like Germany did. Let me just say, Europe has taken up more than 700% exportation of coal from South Africa. What are they doing with coal when they say we shouldn't touch coal? So they have got the ability to drive the agenda and also do an about 10 simply because they've got money. He who calls the tune, who calls the piper calls the tune. And I think that is something that we need to be able to stand up against. The governments and the African Union should be able to stand against that and say, we have got to do our just transition according to the needs of our people. And we've got to make sure that we do not drown in debt at the behest of rich countries. And you would have seen the past few days, of course, we have been impacted by strange weather phenomena.
Yes, that's true.
Cape Town, Eastern Cape,
It's
Durban.
underwater.
Actually, we also a water scarce country. If you go to Durban, East London, and PE, they will tell you about the water restrictions. So it is this which should drive us in order to work faster, not rich countries telling us that now is the time. Let me close by saying this: there is the carbon. They call it CBAM. It's carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe, which is going to be imposed on our products if we don't move faster. So it actually means inclusivity, distributive justice, and restorative justice now falls under the water, because if we don't move fast enough, then our products are not going to be competitive. It's almost like we're being blackmailed by the same countries who are giving us money to step out of coal.
Yeah. And I'm going to give you the last word. You've got less than a minute, Kandis. What is your final word on this conversation?
Well, I think that we've said it time and again. It must be people-led. What is happening in a country needs to address the needs of the people in the country, the people to whom it should be relevant. And we need to stop accepting a mandate that comes from outside in terms of what is most important to us. We've seen time and again that their concerns are not always, and their solutions are not relevant to us as a people. And that is the main thing. It must be people-led, it must be people-centered, and justice must be included in the transition process.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Workers' Power. I really want to thank my guests, Kandis Sebro from the OWTU, coming all the way from the Caribbean to tell us about their experiences on the just energy transition. And of course, Comrade Mbodi of the Numsa National Shop Steward Council. And of course, thank you for the wonderful work that you do representing our members at ESCOM. Thank you for your time, and thank you both for your lovely input. And you heard it from them, guys. At the end of the day, this transition, if it does not improve the lives of the majority of people, if it does not improve the lives of workers and their families, then it's failed. And it's about time that, we started to accept that there are real problems and real challenges with this process. Thank you once again for joining us for this episode of Workers' Power. See you again. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, give us your comments, give us your feedback, give us suggestions for other shows. We love to read your comments. Thank you. See you again.